Hey there, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to rip into a Ford 6R80. The story with this thing is it came from a 2016 Ford F150 4x4 where the owner of the vehicle cited really irregular and erratic shifting patterns. So story is that shortly after he started up and went to drive to wherever, the thing would get up the highway speeds and then start randomly downshifting from 6th gear to 3rd gear, then back down to 1st gear, and it would do this, again, more or less intermittently. And at some point, he cited a no movement condition, nothing in reverse, nothing in whatever forward range setting that he tried on the shifter. So anyway, vehicle was brought into the primary shop. The tech scanned the PCM for codes, pulled up P0715, P0717, which are lead frame codes for the turbine speed sensor. And if you know anything about these transmissions at all, the lead frame is a source of significant consternation and problems. So he figured it needs a lead frame, and we'll get in the lead frame, put it in, bolt it up, and it'll be on its way. But once he dropped the pan, he noticed a whole boatload of kibbles and bits at the bottom, along with excessively saturated clutch material. The fluid was black, it stunk, and so at that point he realized that the transmission needed a lot more than just a lead frame. So they yanked it and made its way here. Anyway, the tech did a deeper scan of the PCM and pulled a whole host of other transmission-related codes. I'll post the image of what they sent me, but there's codes in here for the E and D clutch, time to apply and/or component slipping, gear ratio error, and things of that nature. So it's indicative of what this transmission needs, which is a complete and total overhaul. So anyway, I'm going to spend the next, 8 to 12 minutes talking you through what you need to do to prepare, for overhaul one of these things, steps you need to take before you start taking the transmission apart. I'll discuss a little bit of the history of these units and, application, interchange, and things like that. And then we'll actually get into the teardown itself. So if you don't want to listen to that, or it's stuff you already know, you're just watching this purely for entertainment, feel free to skip ahead. Like I said, it'll be between 8 and 12 minutes. So anyway, I'll go ahead and reposition the camera and we'll go over those things now. So for a quick historical overview of these transmissions, they began life in 2005 and started to install into vehicles at that year. And for the 05 model year, Ford actually was installing the ZF6 HP26 into vehicles before the advent of the 6R60. So much like GM with their 6Ls, the 6L 45, 50, 80, and 90, all of the Ford 6-speeds are all based on the same architectural blueprint as the ZF6 HP26, and that is obviously not coincidental. Ford and GM entered into licensing agreements with ZF to produce these transmissions for all of their different medium-duty platforms, cars, trucks, SUVs, etc. So 2006 was the first year, the 6R60, and they were installed into 4.6 liter equipped Explorers and F150s. And then in 2007, 2008, the 6R75 was introduced, and that went into the Ford Expeditions. And that's a kind of 2-year transmission only, so they're not all that common. The 6R60s and 75s were eventually phased out for what you see in front of you here, the 6R80, and multiple iterations and variants of it began to install into vehicles I believe in 2009, it may have been as early as 2008, and proliferated across all of Ford's medium-duty truck line as well as passenger cars like Mustangs, and that became the standard up until about 2020, where they began to be phased out by the 10-speed units. And the 10 speeds were a joint GM and Ford design engineering project that, as far as I know, had nothing to do with ZF. So anyway, couple things that you need to be very mindful of before taking the transmission apart. And if you have the vehicle, if you're kind of a holistic shop that, takes the vehicle in, removes, reinstalls, and rebuilds the transmission on site, you probably already know this, but for those that are just kind of starting out, you want to make sure you make note of the sticker here on the driver's side. And I'll flash a picture of this because I know you're not going to be able to see it. But what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to scan the PCM if you have the vehicle, and you're going to be looking for the solenoid strategy number. That's this top number right here. Okay, it's a 13-digit number, and you want to make sure that the number that is stored in the PCM matches the number here on the sticker on on the driver's side of the case. If it doesn't, and customers complaining of drivability symptoms, maybe somebody did a swap or tried to, kind of make a expedient repair on the cheap and put the wrong valve body or put the wrong transmission in the vehicle and it's not working, well, this would explain why. If these numbers don't match, that tells me that there is a different solenoid strategy and whole command and control framework in the transmission compared to what the ECM or PCM is expecting to see. So you want to make sure that matches, and then when we get into the valve body, once the pan's off, we will match this number here on the sticker with what's on the valve body. So all three of those things have to cross-reference and reconcile to make sure that your transmission will work and function correctly when installed into the vehicle. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on that general area of the case so that we can discuss the third casting number that you're going to take note, and that is the date stamp codification for this transmission. So let me go ahead and zoom in and I'll walk you through that. All right, you should be able to see both the solenoid strategy and solenoid body ID numbers, as well as this casting number right here. Okay, so you see RF FL3P. So RF stands for rough foundry. You're going to see that on every single Ford part that has ever been made by Ford since at least the 60s. That's never changed. The next four characters are what's going to tell you the year and application that this transmission was produced for and installed into. So in 1999, Ford changed their legacy codification, moving away from like the decade, the year, the application, and the design office convention, and they moved to a slightly different convention that is somewhat similar to GM's, still using four characters. So the first character is going to denote the year. And initially, when this started in 1999, the first character was going to be a number. But starting in 2010, they ran out of numbers and they didn't want to increase the number of characters. They moved to letters. So in 2010, that would equate to A, 2011 is B, and so forth. So F, which is the first character here, indicates a year of production for this transmission of 2015. So the next two characters are going to denote the application. So L3 is the code for F150 or F250. Okay, that's, they use that for both of those trucks. So F150, F250, and then the fourth character is P. That is going to indicate the design office responsible for producing and designing and manufacturing this part within Ford Motor Company. That hasn't changed. It's still the same, and P indicates Ford's automatic transmission design office. So those three numbers are going to be what you want to look at, especially if you're trying to look for a good used unit to swap in because your transmission has failed or you need parts. Using these three numbers here combined with scanning the PCM to get the same numbers, at least for the solenoid strategy code, is going to help you along the way. Without that information, the chances of you grabbing the correct 6L80, bolting it in, and having it work are relatively low, because the newer transmissions and vehicles in general get, the more specialized and application and year specific they become, where interchange is a lot more complicated and becomes a minefield to navigate if you don't know how to distinguish and identify the various iterations of these transmissions. So anyway, that's all I wanted to cover in terms of information on the case and casting numbers. Like I said, we'll show you what you need to look at once you have the valve body in front of you. There's some ways to ID valve body variants as well and kind of match them to the transmission case to make sure you're grabbing the right valve bodies. Alright, so I'll cover socket sizes real quick. So this is going to be 13 millimeters for your selector shaft to lever nut. And then all your bolts for the pump to case, they're 10 millimeter and they take 89 inch-pounds. There's quite a lot of them, but the torque that they take is relatively light for pump to case bolts. This is what passes for a dipstick in these things. This is 18 millimeters. I'm not sure offhand what the torque is. I will annotate. And then your pan bolts are all going to be 8mm. And once we get into the pan off and into the valve bodies, they're going to be Torx 30. 11 fasteners hold the valve body assembly, valve body, Mectronic / TCM. If you have a 2009 or 2010 unit you're working on, it'll have the TCM embedded. They're all Torx 30 to remove it from the case. Okay, you have your case connector here, and then one last thing, a 6mm Allen for your parking pole guide pin. So you'll take this out, there should be an O-ring, and then you'll be able to get the parking pole off. Alright, so that should do it for as far as introduction and all that good stuff. So now we're ready to actually start the teardown. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to evacuate the case first, get all the sub-assemblies aside, and then we'll go through and we'll inspect those in detail, because there's a few things procedurally that you're going to need to know when it comes to taking things apart, particularly in the forward drum. And then I'll cover what you need to do and what you need to have on hand to measure low reverse clutch pack clearance, because there's a special process that you need to follow. As time marches on and as more advanced and more sophisticated transmissions get, the more specialized the procedures become and the more specialized tooling and equipment you need to work on them. So the only other thing I'll mention is holding fixtures. You want to make sure you have a holding fixture that can secure this transmission. They're a little bit wider than the usual 4-speed stuff. I've seen people use C-clamp fixtures. I guess they work fine. I have something that's a little bit different, and it's frankly a lot more expensive, so unless you plan on doing these by the gross, I wouldn't spend the money if you can find a good traditional or conventional C-type fixture with a base that mounts to a bench, or maybe it interfaces with an engine stand. So at the end of the video, if there's time, I'll show you what I have specifically for these transmissions, and maybe I'll tell you the price, maybe I won't, depends on how hard I want to get laughed at. Alright, let's go ahead and begin with the disassembly. Okay, so the initial act that we're going to take is actually to drain the torque converter. So if we look at the converter here, we see a whole bunch of granulated material. Okay, I don't know if the camera's picking this up or not, but anytime you see this, and we see it here on the front of the bell housing as well, and you'll see that in a little bit better detail in a little bit, but whenever you see real granulated material like this, it's a good indication that the torque converter's failed in this unit, and I suspect this one has failed. Especially when you see a whole bunch of metal too in the pan, or similar kind of sand-like aluminum colored substance. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to empty the fluid out of here, and I want to see as it drains what might be in it, what kind of matter is floating around in there. And I'm going to ask my converter builder when he cuts this open, all along here, to see what, if anything, he's found as far as failed elements or components inside the converter. I mean, these things are relatively simple devices. I mean, they only really contain a cover, turbine, a pump, a stator, some bearings, and a converter clutch. And I mean, that's really how a converter is put together, and it works based on allowing for differentiating rotational speeds between engine and transmission, input shaft, output shaft, and all that good stuff. And it basically acts in two ways to enable the function of the unit. First, it provides torque multiplication to get the vehicle moving, and then it provides for fluid coupling to allow the engine and the transmission to sync up at different gear ratios when the drivers reach more or less cruising speed. So at what engine speed that coupling takes place, that dynamic fluid coupling that occurs in here, is the stall speed. So if you hear people say, oh, I have a 1600 stall, or I have an 1800 stall, or I have a 5000 stall, it's roughly 5000 RPMs, or roughly 16 or 1800 RPMs is at what point torque multiplication ceases and fluid coupling begins. Alright, let's see what we got. Not a whole lot of fluid. The primary shop drained out both the converter as well as the pans, so we're not going to have a whole lot of evidence to look at when we take the pan off, but there should be some. I mean, there should be something to help us understand what might have happened inside this unit. But when we see fluid that looks like this, all right, there's going to be bad news. okay, you know the transmission's really hurt. One or more applied elements are shot, and that includes a converter clutch. You know, that's an applied element like any other. And when converters fail, then they usually have, you know, kind of domino effects on the transmission as well. So anytime you have a converter failure, it's just best to overhaul the unit as opposed to just swapping the converter out and cleaning the pan off. So anyway, I see a whole bunch of fluid. I don't see too much in the way of granulated material. This fluid is Mercon LV, or low viscosity. Don't use any other kind of fluid in these things. They all, you know, they take just that kind of fluid. If you do, you'll have all kind of issues and problems. All right, common sense, obviously, but if you're not sure what the fluid is, you know, that's what they take. 13.1 is the capacity listed in the ATSG manual. That might vary a little bit based on model, submodel, and or, you know, what other system components like off-board coolers and things like that could affect the capacity. So, you know, there is a procedure to check level. It involves having the vehicle warmed to operating temperature on a level grade, and then from there you pull out that micro dipstick thing and you read the level on the little stick itself, and you'll see that shortly. Okay, I'm going to let this thing drain out for a little bit, then we'll go ahead and begin the teardown. All right, like I mentioned, 13 millimeters here on the nut. All right, this position is park, so kind of upright this, so just make note. If you are working on a two-wheel drive unit, before you take anything apart, you'll want to check your rear end play. There is a spec for rear end play. Let me grab it real quick. So this is not applicable to 4x4s, but for two-wheel drives, the rear end plate check is going to be 24 to 35 thousandths for anything 2011 and up. Prior to that, the book called for 5 to 13 thousandths. So anytime you change out either the case or the planetary, the rear planet assembly, there's a good possibility that your end play may change. And so that's why you want to check to have a baseline, and you're going to do the same for the front. The front, these transmissions are run tight, so 8 to 15 thousandths is what the book calls for front end play, and there's a selective spacer that sits in behind the stator, and that spacer is what you use to adjust and dial in your end play. And there may be shims for this too. I'm not 100% certain, but the spacer, if you know, again, if you're not changing out hard parts, doing anything wholesale, or swapping the case, you should be okay with respect to the values when you go to measure. But you definitely want to check those things first. So dial indicator here on the flange, and it's like a output flange as part of the shaft assembly, and then take a soft hammer, tap this in all the way as far as it'll go, and then yank it out, and whatever that measurement is, that's your end play. Nasty converter. A converter also has an identification laser engraved code here. So FL3P, it's the same as the transmission, so you know you're matching your converter with your transmission based on those codes. Probably wondering when the hell I'm actually going to get this thing apart. One last thing, this breather. You want to make sure that this breather is not clogged. If that breather is clogged, then the transmission case will never be able to vent moisture that accumulates naturally as the vehicle just sits for periods of time. And so when you know, things heat up, the fluid temperature rises, all that moisture is boiled off, and it vents as steam from the top of that little you know, vent plug or whatever this thing is. So you can blow in air in there, or you can flush it out with brake cleaner or whatever. As long as you have flow through and it's allowed to breathe and vent, you won't have any problems. All right, nasty converter. All right, so 18 millimeters for this. Or is it 19 millimeters? Excuse me, it's 19 millimeters, not 18. My apologies. All right, so that's what it looks like. And you have your dipstick. You see the dipstick. Okay, your case connector pass-through sleeve, you're going to pull that out once the pan's off, and you pull up on the locking latch, and that'll just come out with pliers. I typically will replace these on overhaul, so if you break yours or cracks, don't worry about it. All right, I'm going to knock this rear seal out because it's a lot easier to do with the case, completely full of items. I'm just trying to do it when it's empty. It's a pain in the ass when it's empty. So if I flitch this thing, then I'm going to stop filming. These seals come in the kit. The two-wheel drive and the four-wheel drive versions have a different arrangements of parts and components back here, so you just want to be mindful of that. All right, get this thing out of park. All right, you hear that? That's the mechanical diode one-way clutch assembly at the back of the case. It splines or mates to the rear planet. So for 2011 and up, those were introduced into these transmissions, and they made a whole host of changes in response to the addition of that one-way clutch. So I recognize two generations of Ford 6R80, pre-OWC and post-OWC, and the demarcation model year is 2011. 2009-2010, the low reverse feed was, or low reverse clutch rather, was dually fed through ports called D1 and D2. You'll see that when the valve body's off. In 2011, they eliminated that, and they introduced the one-way clutch assembly to provide a little bit smoother engagement from either reverse to drive, or garage engagement from park to drive or neutral to drive, and I guess that cut down on customer complaints about engagement. I was spinning the input shaft. You can hear it. I'm just yanking on the shaft. I'm not gonna measure. I mean, at 8 thousandths, let's just say that's what it is. You're not gonna be able to feel that anyway, or in most cases you won't. So all Ford medium-duty transmissions, they have this kind of pyramidal, or I don't know, I guess trapezoidal-shaped formation in the pan, so it makes it a little bit unstable. So just be aware of that. 21 pan bolts. All my bolts. All right, so we do have a little bit of fluid in the pan, so some of the fluid migrated in from the converter being on the transmission. I had it on there the entire time. It was sitting on the bench until just shortly before I started filming. But converter holds, I think, either 6 or 7 quarts. I know there's a bolt in the trough, so I can get it. So that's what you got. So you see clutch material like this. This is almost always converter clutch. Converter failed in this unit, and that kind of led to a whole host of other failures and drivability symptoms, issues, and you know how the story goes at this point. All right, I'm gonna get this thing out of the way. Alright, you want to check the pan for dents too. You don't want anything interfering with the pickup. So if that trapezoidal shaped formation is dented, you'll want to just replace the pan unless you can, bang it out, which usually you can do. These sheet metal pans are all the same, so you just knock it all out. Alright, filter, pan gasket. So these are, I think, technically reusable, but I always put a new one on. I mean, there's no sense in reusing them. So the filter itself underwent a series of revisions, and there's different versions of these filters based on the application. So what I would recommend, especially if you're new to these units, maybe you're rebuilding your own for the first time, is don't throw the filter away. Drain it, let it, get all the fluid out of there, and then dry it off, clean it, whatever, and keep it aside so that when you get your new filter, you can bring this one with you to the part shop. Or if you're ordering your stuff online, you can compare the new filter to what came off of here so that you know for a fact it's the correct filter. Or at least you can readily identify if it's not. Okay, got the fluid largely drained out of the filter, so get it all out of the way. And I want to cut this filter open at some point, and we'll look at that, in the second half of the video. I guess I lied, there's still some in there. Whenever you have a converter clutch failure in any transmission, more than likely there's going to be, fine matter clogging this filter element. And so when that happens, you'll have intermittent, random, no movement conditions. And, that was also something that came up as far as drivability symptoms. When I was talking to the tech that was doing the primary work on it. So, meaning removal, reinstallation, line flushing, cooler cleaning, running the fast adapts, filling it, test driving it, all that good stuff. When you have a failure like that, when these things clog, you'll have that intermittent no movement. I got a 4L60E teardown or autopsy video calling it no movement mystery or something like that, and that's what happened in that transmission as well, coincidentally from the same shop. So where I'm at, it's hot, dry, arid. Temperatures exceed 110 degrees for like 4 months out of the year. So having these kinds of failures along with other vehicle related issues or systems going south relatively early compared to elsewhere in the country is common. So is what it is. All right, valve body. So to get the entire valve body, control body assembly with the solenoids, the lead frame or Mechatronic TCM or what have you for your earlier units, you want to pull up and release the locking latch for your pass-through connector. You got to do that first, otherwise this thing will be stuck on there despite you removing all the bolts. Now there's 2 sets of bolts on this valve body. There's these smaller bolts that take a torque 27, and then there's these larger bolts that take a torque 30. We're only going to remove the larger bolts to pull the assembly off the case. So you have 3 of them over here, and then there's 8 of them on the valve body itself. A total of 11 bolts, And when you go back with this thing, there is a torquing and tightening sequence that you have to follow. And if you don't follow it, you risk kind of either warping bores or hanging up valves or whatever, because you're not applying the stresses in the right order, in the right way. So I'll flash an image of what that torque sequence is so that it's readily obvious and there's no mystery as to what bolts need to go tightened and be torqued in the order that I'm referring to. Now, these things are kind of awkward, so get a small extension. Alright, Torx 30, make sure you are fully engaged in that fastener, and obviously make sure your setting is correct on your impact. That was air escaping the glove, not something else. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and remove the valve body bolts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I got one more. 8. So notice the difference in length between the 8 valve body bolts and the 3 lead framed case bolts. And when it's all nasty, dirty, filthy like this, I'll kind of lose my place, thinking this bolt was a Torx 30 variety. It was not. So easy to get discombobulated, I guess. Plus I'm filming, so, you know. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and yank out that pass-through connector. So just a pair of pliers, and like I said, don't worry so much if you accidentally crack or break it. They're readily available. Takes an O-ring here. O-rings come in the kit. Alright, so now all we're going to do is just kind of lift up and out on the whole valve body assembly, and that'll be that for that. Alright, I'm going to zoom in so you can see the solenoid strategy number and the casting code for date and application. As soon as I dry my hands. Alright, it's got a little QR code here too that can be scanned. It's got a couple of them actually, so FL3P and then FL3P, both laser engraved and cast. And then you have your solenoid strategy number right here. So that's how you identify and match your valve body and your case to your vehicle application. Alright, I'm not going to do any kind of video showing the teardown of the valve body and reassembly of it. I mean, nobody watches them anyway. What I will do is a video on the solenoids, the valve body lineup, so at least you can see what those lineups look like. And I'll also reassemble this valve body, and we'll do a separate video that will walk you through the vacuum test process. With these transmissions, I do a two-step deal. I reassemble the valve body as it is right now. I don't install any kind of aftermarket correction parts, no kits, nothing. And then I test it because I want to see if the valve body is problematic. Then, based on whatever valves or valve trains are showing weakness in terms of sealing integrity, if I don't have corrective parts for that, then I'm going to recommend the valve body be replaced, or I'll require it if they want a warranty. So that's how we'll approach that deal. But for now, I'm just going to put it on the other bench, and we'll continue with the teardown here. So a lot of recalls and or TSBs associated with the lead frames. So if you have, I think, between 2011, 2012, or 2013, there was a recall that affected literally millions of vehicles, if I'm remembering this correctly. Millions of vehicles that where the output speed sensor, vehicle speed sensor portion of that lead frame was intermittently failing to send a signal to the PCM for vehicle speed, so the transmissions would randomly downshift from whatever gear they were in all the way back to first gear, causing like violent, violent adjustments, if you will, for the drivers, and even in some cases were causing accidents. So, just something to be aware of if you're, 6L80 vehicle equipped owner of those years. And there's a few others. I'll post a list or a chart on the screen that shows you all the TSBs. All right, so over here you have your bridge seal. This is going to be your cooler bypass valve element. And then, of course, your parking linkage. This is going to be your parking pole guide plate, the pole itself. And then here are all your seals. So in port D2 is empty. There is nothing there. And looks like this seals came out. See what's on the valve body it is. And I'll show it to you. It's stubborn, does not want to come out. All right. All the seals are coded by color and by length, and they're all different lengths. So here's one seal. I'll put it back in for now. Let me grab up this other one. Alright, this is just simply stuck to the casting. That happens. But that one right there. They come in the kit. You never reuse these. So what I'm going to now do is I'm going to fire up the air compressor, and we'll do a case air check, and I'll show you where all the ports are for the various clutch packs, so that if you need to, you're trying to diagnose problems, or if you're tearing one of these units down, you want to see if like maybe a worn sealing surface somewhere in the apply side of the clutch is responsible for clutch burnup, then this is a good way to diagnose or identify that. Okay, there's two remaining things I'm going to cover when it comes to the valve body. They're pretty important. Once I cover those, we'll put it aside on the other bench for the last time, then we'll do the case air check. So you'll notice here this thing has a big hole in it right here, okay? This is going to be your lower valve body. The upper valve body half is the side. And the reason that hole is there is due to a design change for the 2015 model years. So the valve bodies themselves, at least for the 6R80s, are generational, meaning there's two different generations of valve body. There's 2009 through 2014, and then there's 2015 and up. And the defining characteristic is, well, I guess visually, is this hole here. And while that hole isn't all that important in itself, it denotes that you are looking at a valve body that was installed in a vehicle that has start-stop technology as part of its, powertrain. So Ford began introducing start-stop technology for model year 2015 across F150s and other vehicles. I think Mustangs too got them. And That necessitated some valve body changes that were fairly significant and rendered these valve bodies completely different in many respects to their predecessor counterparts between 2009 and 2014. So for the purposes of interchange and looking for valve body replacements, you want to make sure you're aware of that so that you don't inadvertently buy the wrong valve body for your transmission. All right, the other concept I want to cover, and I'm only going to gloss over this because it really requires an entire video in of itself, and that is the principle of what we call solenoid banding. Okay, so you have all your variable force solenoids here on this side of the valve body, and these solenoids are not all the same. They're not all the same when we talk about the individual assembly, and they're not all the same when it comes to different years and models or submodels. So remember we talked about making sure we match up our solenoid strategy codes between the what's in the PCM, what's on the case on that sticker, and what's on the valve body. Well, the reason we're doing that is because the solenoid strategy code indicates the solenoid banding configuration for each of these variable force solenoids, because they all operate at a different frequency and they're different in terms of what the PCM sees from solenoid to solenoid. So like I said, I'll get into this in more detail and kind of give you charts and graphs or other things to kind of aid you in understanding and learning about solenoid banding for these transmissions when I do the video that will be associated with that. But I wanted to make you aware of it just so that you knew, and if you didn't, and you can research that on your own in the meantime. And then the only other thing I'll mention is right here. This is the spacer plate. The spacer plate has this notch cut into it. That indicates a 2015 and up spacer plate. These were redesigned to coincide with the valve body changes that occurred for that model year on up, so that it can be used in a vehicle that has start-stop technology on board. All right, now it's going to go on the other bench for the last time. Okay, so I'm going to use Ford's nomenclature to identify each of the different clutch packs, but ZF, GM, and Ford all use kind of a different system to label or name their respective clutches. So these transmissions have 3 drive clutches and 2 brake clutches, or braking clutches. And brake here simply is synonymous with arrest or stop. So the easiest way to remember which ones are which are the front 3. Okay, the front is meaning the forward clutch, the overdrive clutch, and the direct clutch. Those are going to be your driving clutches or drive clutches. Your intermediate clutch and your low reverse clutch are what we call braking clutches. So the way these transmissions work, they're what we refer to as clutch-to-clutch transmissions. They don't use any bands in here, okay? No bands, no separate accumulator circuits, nothing like you might see in a legacy 4-speed like your 4R70, 75Ws or, 5R55s. They use servos and all these other kinds of things. And the 6Rs, the GM6Ls, and the ZF6, they did away with all that stuff. It's all clutches. And in the case of the GM and the later Ford units, a one-way clutch assembly in the back. So if you think about this from a power flow perspective, you have the engine making chemical energy, converting it to mechanical energy. That mechanical energy then gets transferred to the rest of the powertrain, including the transmission, via the torque converter by way of the flex plate. So all of that energy then has to be managed and manipulated so that you can have differential rotation between engine speed and output shaft speed so that you have your different gears. And that's where all the different clutches, the hubs, and the gears and shafts come into play that give you that differentiating rotation based on commands issued by the PCM or those older units that had a TCM on board the valve body assembly, all the command and control framework and logic so that you can have gears 1 through 6 in a forward pattern or reverse when you throw it into reverse. So so this is going to be your intermediate feed. This is going to be your low reverse feed. This is D1. This is D2. So if you have a 6R80 2009, 2010, you're not going to have that one-way assembly. You will have a live feed here, and there'll be another tube just like you see here. In the 2011 up model years, that went away with the introduction of the rear one-way diode. And then this is going to be for your direct clutch. All right. Up here, you're going to have your forward and you're going to have your overdrive clutch feeds. All right, we'll start with the forward clutch. So that's going to be your A clutch in ZF parlance, or your 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch if you're working on a GM 6L transmission. Okay, this is your forward drum. All right, now we'll go ahead and we'll do the intermediate clutch. I'm just going in kind of the order that you know, you have gears achieved. So intermediate is going to be here. That's this clutch right here. And air is coming out of the back of the nozzle. You can see your clearance as well. So then your direct clutch is going to be here. This is basically third, fifth, and reverse. So you can see the clutch apply here. Okay, it's good, robust apply. So your overdrive clutch is going to be here. So this is gears 4, 5, and 6. And that has full fluid. And then lastly, we'll do low reverse. So there's only one port in these for low reverse. That's your D1. All right, and in ZF parlance, this is the D clutch. Low reverse is D clutch. This is C clutch. The A clutch is the forward clutch, and the direct clutch is going to be your B clutch, and then your overdrive clutch is going to be your E clutch. And then in GM parlance, 1, 2, 3, 4 clutch, 3, 5 R clutch, 4, 5, 6 clutch, 2, 6 clutch, and low reverse clutch. All right, so that's the air check. So the next thing we need to do is remove all the parking linkage. So that means we had to take out that little parking pin retainer bolt, 6mm Allen. You got these 2 bolts here for your detent roller. You have a roll pin here that has to come out for your rooster comb to selector shaft. And then you have your 4 bolts for your parking pole guide plate. So these are 8mm. Like I said, that was a 6mm Allen. And then this is just a roll pin punch. And incidentally, these other 2 ports are for the torque converter. So, I mean, I guess if you had the converter here, which I do, you wanted to test a converter clutch or something, you can do that through one of these, but it's not something I ever do. So I couldn't tell you which one to test. All right, I had put this back in for whatever reason. I was going to mention something about it, but now I completely spaced it. I mean, it's not important. Trust me, if it was, I'd mention it. All right, let me go ahead and get these bolts out here, and then we'll kind of turn the case so that the rear is facing the camera, and we'll yank out that 6mm Allen guide plate pin bolt. So note the arrangement, just like that, and then all the bolts are the same length. All right. For your selector, you're going to need to just move it so that you gain access to the roll pin, and then just pound it out with a roll pin punch that's suitably sized and a hammer. That's basically it. Get a little bit. All right. Your parking rod, just note how it goes. All right, once the roll pin's out, just go ahead and take a punch and just go ahead and tap out your selector shaft. And then that'll free up the rooster comb and the little spacer. Alright, last, at least on the case here, is going to be the detam roller. So 8 millimeters as well. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and flip the case around so we can get it that 6 millimeter parking pole guide plate pin. So just take a punch from the back side and kind of just push it out until you can grab it. And that's it. So the spring goes like this. All right. Now what I'm going to do is turn the case so that the front is facing you, and then we'll begin to evacuate it. Obviously starting with the pump. Let me actually pull these out real quick so you can see them. Because like I said, they're all different in terms of their lengths and their colors. So that's your direct. This is going to be your low reverse, D1. Direct is E. So E is shorter. Low reverse is kind of in the middle in terms of length, and then you have your intermediate, which is the longest. Okay, your D2 would be in this location here. Bridge seal. If you have like weird shifting issues, especially at higher or wide open throttle angles, and it's like flaring or slipping, and it's only doing that when you're under heavy acceleration, this bridge seal could be the cause of that. They will wear, and so you'll have erratic line pressure characteristics at higher to wide open throttle angles under high torque demand. Now I'll move the camera back just a little bit. Alright, selector shaft seal, by the way, just take a screwdriver and pry it out. That's it. $10mm on these bolts here. There's a whole host of them. So 13 bolts total. And they take a little sealing washer here. So a couple different ways you can get this pump out. Some folks will use flat blade screwdrivers and pry on the direct drum, and that sometimes pushes the pump out. I like to use my pump removal tool, so I'll set that up, and then all I want to do is just use a forcing screw with the the tool itself clamped onto the stator, and that will allow me to yank it out and keep everything else in the case, because I want to pull things out in kind of a controlled fashion so that you can see all the orientation of everything as well as any bearings, and you know exactly how those go. So that's what we'll do. All right, let's start cranking down so we can pull the assembly out of the case. All right. So here is our selective spacer. Let's see how thick it is. It's exactly 100,000. Looks like exactly 100 thousandths. You'll notice they are color coded. So there you have it, spacer. So the pump underwent a significant change in 2014. They did away with the previous design drive gear that used lugs to engage the torque converter. So the torque converter hub would have lugs like a GM converter, and that's how it would engage the pump rotor or the drive gear. In 2014, they went back to flats. So if you're looking for pump gears, you want to make sure you match up the correct gear set with your application and what it takes. All right. So Torx 30, you have two sets of Torx bolts here. All you're going to do is remove these. You don't have to remove the inner set. Okay, that holds the stator to the stator support. All we're trying to do is remove the pump body with the gears from the stator support assembly. Alright, do your best to not booger the threads, or the, not the threads, the Torx, female engagement there, because if you do, it'll be a bitch getting it out. Alright, they're all the same length, these bolts. Make sure that thing doesn't roll around. All the same length. So I'll keep 2 bolts behind. And I'll just kind of thread them in part way into the pump body so that I can knock the pump body out of the pump cover. So just knock it out. All right, so with these gears, I always replace them. I don't like to reuse pump gears. I'll flash the part numbers on the screen for the pump gears for the two different designs. But with any other pump or any other like kind pump where you have a priming crescent, that's going to be your main concern when it comes to checking for wear. Alright, so notice the arrangement, or orientation I should say. The beveled part of the flat faces front. Earlier units had a roller bearing or a needle bearing assembly in here. So you had your seal and then you had your needle bearing assembly. They went to a traditional bushing, I want to say in 2011, maybe 2010, somewhere in there. So Omega Machine makes a bushing that will retro to those earlier units that have a bearing. So if you wanted to run a bushing instead, there's a bronze bushing available, and it will install into the location where the bearing was. Just going to knock this seal out. So pretty straightforward and simple pump. So you have your suction side and your pressure side. Exactly which side is which, I'm not 100%. But you can tell there is a difference between the two in terms of, some markings here. And I'll annotate the video with which side is correct. I'm just a little, I guess the orientations kind of threw me a little bit. But if you're going to reuse your gears, you just want to check for wear here on the outside. You want to check the teeth, make sure that the teeth are not excessively worn, make sure there's no cracks, fractures, fissures, things of that nature. You're going to do the same checks with the drive gear. You also want to make sure that these flats are not mushrooming. That's very common in other units. I don't see it too much here, but like I said, prefer to replace all of these gear assemblies because well, I guess that's just what I prefer to do. It just kind of resets the aging clock back to 0. Alright, you have 2 pump O-rings, one for the body, and then one for the pump cover or stator support. So check your working surface. Alright, any kind of scoring, anything you can feel. It's recommended that you resurface this. Check, pay very close attention to the sealing ring groove area. Okay, you always want to make sure that there's no grooves cut into the inner diameter of the stator. You have 2 other sealing rings here of the interlock variety. Okay, check your journal surfaces. See some discoloration. On this side here, you see it's making contact with bushings in the forward drum. So all the bushings that this transmission has always get replaced. I mean, that's true of any transmission. You don't want to reuse things like bushings. Not a good idea. A lot of dust on that thing. Like I said, you do not have to separate the stator from the stator support. It's not necessary unless you need to do a swap. And then, of course, splines. Check splines. Make sure the splines are not twisted in any way, shape, or form. I mean, for a stock vehicle that's largely used just for commuting or light towing, hauling within the, you know, engineering limits of what the vehicle is intended for, you're not going to have that issue. Splines everywhere in the transmission will twist when you have high horsepower, high RPM situations. Folks adding superchargers or other forms of forced induction, you know, getting wild and crazy at the drag strip, or doing, like, you know, tug of war type towing contests. So some of these 6R80s were put into the Raptors. In fact, I think that's the only transmission the Raptors saw in at least the later years. So that would be a unit that could possibly have twisted splines or other types of hard part damage, just due to, you know, sheer, I guess for lack of a better term, abuse. Alright, that's the pump. So now we have the overdrive and Ford drum assembly. There's 3 sealing rings here. 6R60s just had 2. So here's the whole assembly. So you have your hubs. This is going to be your forward clutch hub. You will notice there is a bearing. And this is the orientation of that bearing. So your intermediate shaft. And this is going to be your direct clutch hub. And it's going to be your forward drum. And the overdrive drum is inside here. That's going to be your overdrive clutch pack. So the direct drum is in the case still. That and the overdrive drum take a lot of abuse, and a lot of times they are burn up. So some of that comes from the valve body. The valve body has a lot of areas of wear. The bore plugs in particular, they tend to wear. So the best thing to do with these things is to install something like a Sonic zip kit, or Transgo repro kit, or some other valve body or hydraulics correction kit that will address some of these common issues, so that you don't have a repeat of history. Alright, now I'll push this to the side. We'll break it down in a little bit. Next is going to be your direct drum. So you'll have a bearing on the back side of the drum. It actually goes onto the center support. And note the orientation. Okay, there's going to be sealing rings here. You have 2 of them, scarf cut, splines, bushing. Alright, now you're going to be confronted with a very large snap ring in the case. So if you're familiar at all with these, or the ZF or 6L counterpart transmissions, then you will know about this snap ring. It is quite beefy, so I'm going to reposition the camera a little bit. I'm going to see if I can get the get the angle in such a way that you can see me work the snap ring with the giant pliers. Now, if you don't have giant pliers, you can remove this snap ring with large flat blade screwdrivers and hammer. I've seen people reinstall the snap ring. YouTube videos, and that's what I mean by people. Just by hand, and then persuade it in with like a flat blade screwdriver and hammer once they have it most of the way. I like to use the pliers because I purchased them. I might as well get my money's worth out of them, but that's kind of different approaches to dealing with this big snap ring. Okay, hopefully the camera caught that and you saw what it is I was doing, but basically you have a snap ring which is beveled on one side. That side faces you, faces the front of the unit, and then the back side's flat, that faces rearward. Let me see if I can keep it here for extraction. So here's your center support, your intermediate clutch. You'll notice the D3 port does not exist. Just cast it over and then you have your other ports. Okay. The center support design also changed between 2010, 2011. I mean, there's a whole host of changes that took place just so that the mechanical diode one-way assembly can go into the case. I mean, the planet changed, the case itself changed, center support changed, valve body changed, solenoid strategies are different. I mean, you name it, chances are it changed. So you're going to have, I should have pointed this out earlier, you have your anti-clunk spring here. Alright, that needs to go back into the case. With this side facing this way when you're looking at the case. Okay, just slips in. Like this. Okay, this side here is facing the passenger side of the transmission. Here's our bearing. And we also have a spacer. I'll show you exactly how these go once we reorient the camera. We also have keyways for the center support, so it's important that those keyways go back in as well. Mechanical diode. So when the diode is facing in this direction, the diode element itself, it freewheels counterclockwise and locks clockwise. Okay, you can take it apart to replace the elements inside. I just replaced the whole entire assembly. That's just the way I do it. Alright, now you got to plan it along with your low reverse frictions. Now the low reverse clutch pack in here is installed backwards relative to the way most of them get installed inside the case. In traditional arrangements, you're going to have your snap ring, a backing plate, and then, friction disc, steel disc, friction steel, so forth, and then an applied piston. In the case of the GM units, the low reverse clutch pack was inside the center support. It was part of that assembly. Not so with the Ford unit. GM made a lot of changes to their respective ZF-based platform for the 6Ls relative to what Ford did. Ford stayed largely true to the architecture. So you have your planet. Now you notice the planet is also different. The sun gears are not captured like they are in the GM units. Okay, hopefully I can stand out of the way so that there's not shadow on the planet. So I just wanted to give you a quick close-up, as that's what that planet looks like. Alright, so now what we're going to do is just yank it out. And you'll see sun gears, they will want to come out. I mean, if you don't want them coming out, just grab it from somewhere else. And then keep a finger on the sun gears so that they don't come out. Let me zoom back out. And then here's your backing plate. These are selective. There's 3 different backing plate thicknesses available. So like I said, there is a special procedure that you have to follow when measuring for low reverse clutch pack clearance. It involves a special tool, a depth micrometer, and then of course your transmission case. Alright, and then we have our output shaft / ring gear assembly. And then on the back there is a case bearing. And then in the back of the case itself there is a needle bearing. So these components do come apart. There is a snap ring here. So we'll take those apart in a minute. Alright, this bearing gets replaced on overhaul. There's special bearing installer, or drivers rather. They're made by OTC for various bearings on these units. And so you'll want to have those or equivalent that'll work. Here's your other keyway. There's 2 of them. And so now we have an empty case. Alright, I'm just going to put this case, shove it to the left side of the bench. A bunch of sand. Got some of the desert coming in with this transmission. Alright, let me go ahead and reposition the camera and we'll start going through the rest of these sub-assemblies. Okay, we'll start with the intermediate clutch and the center support. So again, this design changed. This spacer that you see right here did not exist prior to 2011. And so all these design changes coincided with the introduction of the low diode. So those 2 bars, those keyways, they go just like this. Okay. And so they basically locate and retain the center support in the case so that it doesn't rotate. Alright, so here is your intermediate clutch. So we have good apply. Let me move this out of the way a little bit. We'll get to that in a second. So the intermediate clutch, at least from an application standpoint, is fine. This is on in 2nd and 6th gear. Here's your snap ring. Let's take a look at the frictions and steels, see how they are. So 5 frictions, 5 steels on a backing plate and a cushion plate at the bottom. So steel plate. Not too bad looking. Clutches look okay. This thing had 152,000 miles on it. So far, so good in terms of the condition of the frictions. You don't see too many issues with this clutch. I mean, depends on, you know, what kind of wear you have in your valve body and how bad it is and where it is will kind of drive what you see in the applied elements, but overall that looks okay. All right, we already looked at the low diode. They get replaced with an OEM Ford version. So that bearing sits like this. All right, so if you wanted to think about it in terms of the center support, you have your spacer and then you have your bearing here. So just like that. All right, let's look at the low reverse frictions. Come on, give it up, give it up. All right, these things don't want to cooperate. Alright, so I put these out of order. So here's your cushion plate that's going to face you. It's the last part of this clutch that goes in. Then you have your 5 frictions and 5 flat steels. Here's the bottom steel. I should say the steel faces the cushion plate. Alright, these frictions are brand new. No issues here. Separate the frictions and the steels. We'll look at the planet in a second. This is the bottom of the steel. Sorry about the mess. I just want to make sure everything's in view for you. So, no issues with this clutch. There was no problems reported when the vehicle was in reverse, other than the no movement condition, which, like I said, I think that was a product of a clogged filter, but we'll cut it open and I'll show that to you at the end of the video. But they look fine to me. And then lastly is the backing plate itself. Like I said, these are selective, so this is the side that faced the case, this is the side that faced frictions. It's got a piece of a towel on there. Alright, so this is going to be your return spring assembly here, along with your apply pistons. So you have your spacer, your snap ring, your Belleville plate, and then your apply piston right here. So I'm going to go to the press so I can remove this, and then we'll look at the piston and everything else. And when you reinstall this, look at the locking bosses here. Notice how all 4 are engaged. You just want to make sure that you put it back on just like that. You only have to press it just far enough to free up tension on the snap ring, and that's it. Alright, so this tool is a Kentmore DT47867. Alright, it allows you to grab hold of the snap ring and then you can release tension. You'll find with a lot of these ZF based transmissions, you're going to need a shop press as opposed to a foot press to deal with various clutch return Belleville plate snap rings. It's true of the 6Ls and the ZFs themselves. Alright, so notice the orientation here of the return elements. Alright, they face up. And then here is your piston. This piston changed as well. Prior pistons, they did not have these cutouts. So again, this is all owing to the addition of that low diode. 2011. So you have an O-ring here. And an O-ring here on the stator. So here's your snap ring for this thing. So you just compress this just like the other one, and you're going to repeat the process. So I'm going to go to the press and do that. One thing you always want to check is any bleeder balls. You want to make sure they're functioning. So that's true of anything. Any kind of apply piston, any housing that has a bleeder ball or a bleeder capsule. Alright, the piston does not. The housing does. You just want to make sure that it's functioning as it should. And one last thing before I depart with this. You have your locating dowel here. That goes here. And then you have a corresponding dowel or tab on the plate. So like that. I mean, and then like that. I mean, obviously you have your return plate here. And that's it. All right. Now let me go and remove the other piston assembly out of the center support for the intermediate clutch. And then we'll be done with this thing and we'll put it aside and we'll continue to the direct drum. All right, be right back. Same deal with this thing. I decided to film it. I didn't think I was going to, but this tool is literally just wide enough to tackle both this one here and then dimensionally small enough to tackle the reverse side. So and this one might fight me. So let me go grab a screwdriver. All right, back to the bench. We'll take it all apart. Try that again. This time with me not interfering with the piston. Same result. Alright, so now you have your drum empty, or I should say the clutch basket is empty. Just check in here where sealing rings go. Again, you don't want to feel anything. It's okay if you see wear patterns, but you don't want to feel any wear patterns. That would be indicative of a problem. So mention this O-ring here. Nothing on the inside here. The piston takes 2 O-rings. left the snap ring on the on that other tool chest by the press. Alright, let's look at this. So this is going to be your output shaft / ring gear assembly. So you have the ring gear basket, which is separate from your output shaft / parking gear. And then you have your bearing. Alright. Bearing is captured. So as you can see, I'm trying to lift up on it. It won't come off. There is your snap ring. And there you have it. Pretty basic, pretty straightforward. So you want to check here, your teeth obviously, check your lugs. Check your lugs here. All you're doing is looking for wear. Anything unusual, pretty simple and straightforward otherwise. Make sure this bearing's not making any noise, this one's perfectly fine. Alright, now I'm going to bring the planet over. So as I mentioned before, the design of the Ford Planet is going to be drastically different than the GM Planet in terms of the face of it, if you will, or the top plate. The GM Planets, you have a seal here with a needle bearing assembly. And you have to take that out to get at the internal sun gears. So you're going to have your top sun gear. Then there's going to be an axial bearing underneath of it. So you have your lip facing the other sun gear, facing down. And then you have your inner sun gear. Note the orientation of the splines. You see how these splines, there's less of a gap from the top of the splines to the face of the gear relative to these splines. So you want to make sure that they face down. And you have one more bearing down here. Alright. Yeah, you don't want to be driving no cars. Alright, looks like he's about 12 years old, so it's probably a good thing. This obviously faces up into the sun gear. Alright, so for Planet, you're going to check all your pinion gears. Okay, this is a compound Ravino style planetary carrier assembly. Alright, the use of these enables you to achieve multiple different gear ratios in one housing. So it's very efficient. It is complicated relative to a Simpson style planetary assembly, which consists of just one planetary carrier, single stack, non-compound, and one sun gear. Okay, the only other design in terms of planetary configuration is going to be and I'm going to butcher this term, Lepeltier, which really is a kind of an overarching designation for both of the simple planetary design and the planetary design that uses a common sun gear between two planets and ring gears. So, anyway, that's kind of the 3 different types of planetary carriers you may find in an automatic transmission. You don't want to see these bad. I mean, they're not cheap to replace. So no side play, that's really all you're concerned about when it comes to movement. They all have a minimal amount of vertical movement that has to be there. So I'll have to check the specs on these. And you can take feeler gauges and measure and compare them to the spec and see if you have wear. If you have wear here, you can either have these rebuild them yourselves with a repair kit, or you can simply replace them. And then check your splines here. A base plate can be stressed in very high horsepower, high RPM applications. I mean, unless there's a lube starvation issue or some sort of massive failure or just low on fluid and things been just used, abused, run hard and put away wet, so to speak, the planets are usually not a source of issue in these transmissions, usually. Alright, oops. Let's go ahead and bring the sun gears back. So we'll check the teeth there. Notice there is indexing grooves. Okay, that just simply identifies this particular gear. Same with the bottom sun gear or rear sun gear. And these 2 axial bearings are the same. So they go wherever. Alright. So we'll look at the direct drum. We have a bearing that goes like so. And this bearing more or less nests between the drum and the center support. So as I mentioned, 2 bushings, they need to be replaced, and 2 sealing rings. So snap rings for the drive clutches. Alright, the snap ring for this one, the forward and the overdrive clutch are all selective. So I'll flash the clearances on the screen along with the different thicknesses of selective snap ring. But if you're not changing your drum and you're buying factory frictions and steels, then you shouldn't have a problem. Okay, with GM they had what were referred to as blind splines, so you had to be careful about where you put the ends, and they would just straddle the splines that had no snap ring groove. So Ford doesn't have that. So you're going to have your cushion plate, your bottom steel, and these clutches look a little stressed, but otherwise normal for the amount of mileage. Like I said, it's not uncommon to see this clutch pack burnt. And then here's your backing plate. Alright, I'm not going to film the removal of the rest of these pistons, just simply because you kind of get the idea. The video will be 10 hours long. Let me go ahead and get rid of the snap ring, and then we'll look at the piston and rest of the assembly. Alright, so here's your snap ring. And then this is going to be your piston dam or balance piston. Just note the orientation. It's your Belleville return plate. And then you have your apply piston. And it's kind of slippery and I don't want to mar anything, so I'm just trying to be careful with it. Alright, there we go. Come on. So, 2 O-rings. Just look everything over. Make sure there's nothing weird going on. No damage of any kind. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So here's the basket. So just check over the lugs. You want to make sure there's no excessive scoring or grooves cut in anywhere. You don't want them to have like clutches hanging up. So other than that, it's a pretty straightforward deal. Alright, we've got a giant snap ring, so let me change out my battery and then we'll go through the forward/overdrive clutch assembly. There's a few things that you got to be mindful of in terms of this assembly. You got to make indexing marks for snap rings, both for the direct clutch hub as well as the front planet and how it's retained. Alright, cleared a little space on the bench, move some parts around so we can now disassemble the last major subassembly in this transmission, which is the forward/overdrive clutch housing assembly. So we have the forward clutch. This is the forward clutch housing. You have the direct clutch hub, and then you have your overdrive clutch, which is here's your overdrive hub, and then here's your forward hub. So the direct clutch hub is secured with the snap ring. That is a little bit different than any other snap ring you may have encountered before. And there's a certain procedure that you have to use to remove and then reinstall the snap ring. You'll notice there's locking bosses on the hub itself. You got 2 here, 1 major, 1 here, and then you have 1 up here. So if you try to reinstall the snap ring like you would any other, starting with one end, get it worked in and kind of go all the way around, you're not going to get the other snap ring end by the boss. So how you install this is you actually get both ends in at the same time, get them in their respective locations, and then work it around from the ends to the center. And that's how you do it. Now what the ATSG manual has you do, for indexing purposes, they have you go 180 out relative to the ends and make a paint mark there. And then they have you pry outward based on this location. So wherever that mark is, this lug or this lug, I think, is roughly 180 out. Actually, it's going to be this lug over here. So here is the snap ring end right here. So 180 out is going to be either this lug or this lug. So that's what they have you do. They have you make a mark. And, I mean, this mark's not going to last, but we'll just kind of do it for, procedure's sake. And then what they have you do is begin working the snap ring out until you remove it, and then they have you set it aside, which obviously. So this is where they want you to start the removal process. They want you to begin prying it out from here. Now, if you have a hole in your bench, the best way to approach this, especially for reassembly, is to use the hole so that you can fit everything through. But we'll do that when we film the reassembly, but I'm just going to do it here on the bench like you see it. So you want to actually have 2 screwdrivers, at least that's what I like to do. So I'll just use them in tandem with each other. And that's it. So we'll kind of rotate it. And you can just simply pry out on it. So the book tells you that if you don't do it this way, if you pry elsewhere, you could potentially damage the forward drum. I don't know if that's, you know, to what extent that's possible. But here is the direct clutch hub. Okay, here's your bosses. And I mean, that's basically it. So if you want, you can mark where they came from or where this goes into. So I'll just hold it with a finger. So you have different locations. Now here's my mark. I went 180 out. So this is where I would reinstall it actually. I don't think it matters, to be perfectly honest with you. Alright, then go ahead and pull off your hub. Check your lugs. Okay, make sure that none of the forward clutch disc teeth would get caught up on anything in here. Alright, that's the usual point of inspection on the hubs. Then here's your intermediate shaft. As you can see, it's broken off. It's a common problem with these. So that would explain the erratic shifting. So we'll need a new one. Make note of the bearing. I'm just going to grab a picture. So maybe this will become a tool. Alright, so again, note the position of your bearings. So here is your overdrive clutch. Alright, or 456 clutch. E clutch if you're using ZF nomenclature. And here's your planet, and then this is just an oil dam. This comes off. And maybe it doesn't. Should come right out. So your top hat bearing is going to go with the lip facing down in toward the planet. And the planet, as you can see, is held in place. It's captured. So we'll take out the forward clutch and we'll also look at the overdrive clutch. I'm curious to see if any of these two elements are burnt up, especially the overdrive clutch. So again, these snap rings are selective. So we have converter clutch material, or maybe it's forward clutch material. I've been assuming that's been converter clutch material, but maybe we'll be surprised. So here's your cushion plate. And then your bottom steel. Frictions look good. Steel friction, steel friction. You have 5 frictions, 5 flat steels, your cushion plate, and of course your backing plate. And this is the steel that functions as the backing plate. I mean, not a traditional backing plate per se. Should have specified that. Alright, let's take a look at the 456 or slash overdrive clutch. Got a bearing there. We'll keep it right there for now. So here is the arrangement. So the other half of the intermediate shaft. Alright, when I cut in here, I noticed this after I filmed the rest of it, but look at these frictions. Alright, they're all literally coming apart. So, friction material flaking off. And that's what we saw as we were going through the unit. Pieces of this clutch material flaking off the overdrive clutch. Again, very vulnerable clutch in these transmissions, both the 456 slash overdrive slash E-clutch, whether you're referring to Ford, GM, or ZF, as well as the direct clutch, or B-clutch, or 3.5R clutch, 3.5 in reverse. 6 frictions, 6 steel on a backing plate. 6 steels, I should say. Steels. Alright, no cushion plate. Selective. So when it comes to these transmissions, the GM and the ZF equivalents, you want to do the best you can to get kind of right in the middle of the prescribed clutch clearance range. Alright, you don't want to be on the fringes. Because if you're on the fringes, as you're measuring it on the bench, if the clearance itself changes just a little bit, and then here I'm talking a couple thou, 2-3 thou, when it goes back in, if it changes in such a way that it puts you out, then the result can be either very subtle tie-ups or very subtle flares. And in most cases, the flare, the tie-up occurs at the first drive cycle of the day. And then the computer will adapt and adjust for it if, you know, the overage is, you know, just very minor, if it's not too severe. If you're way out, then you're just going to have mechanical problems, and no amount of adaptation by the computer is going to, you know, fix, solve, or mask them. So that's kind of the deal there. And that's why when a clutch-to-clutch transmission, you want to be really, really, I guess, focused on getting your clutch clearances within the range. And like I said, I aim right for the middle. So check the lugs, converter, that's converter clutch material. These splines will sometimes twist on you. So because we have a failure here, thinking we really need to scrutinize splines elsewhere. So this is dirty. I'm going to clean it up and look at them later. So here's the intermediate shaft, or what's left of it. See if I can get a snap ring on it. Out of there. When I was spinning the shaft, I'm like, man, this feels awfully easy to spin, you know? It feels loose. Well, no wonder. So that's how it goes. So we'll put this aside. The nice thing about this design is you can replace these two parts independently. Earlier designs, this was welded, and I mean the whole thing, if it broke in half like this, then you would you'd have to replace the whole assembly. But this changed I guess, to try to mitigate some of the warranty claims. Snap ring's a little bit more robust, but I mean, having these shafts fail is unfortunately a common issue. It's recommended that for any kind of power application, any kind of heavy-duty towing, hauling, working, you just run with a billet steel intermediate shaft, and that usually fixes the problems, you know, with respect to having your intermediate shaft snap on you. So here's your little bearing for your 456 clutch hub. All right, I'm going to take this out. There's a special tool for this that allows you to compress your piston dam so that you can get the snap ring. So I'll film that real quick so you can see it. It's an OTC dealership tool. I have it. I got it for 20 bucks off eBay. Figure why not. So let's go to the press and we'll take this out, look at the pistons, and then we'll deal with the planet in the forward drum, get that out. I'll show you the kind of the rigmarole you got to do there with the retainer, and that'll be it for this transmission. Okay, so the tool that you see in here is going to be OTC 307-209, and I use it to compress this particular return spring or Belleville return plate so I can get it to snap ring. And just like all of the others, you just need to compress it far enough so that there's no more tension on the snap ring, and that's it. And this one is a beefy one, so just make sure your snap ring pliers are up to par. Alright, hopefully you can see that. If not, I'll, annotate, but that's the tool number. Note the orientation of the Belleville plate. Alright, we'll go back to the bench and look at this in a little bit more detail. So once again, you have an O-ring. My hands are absolutely soaked and laden with fluid, so here's the orientation of the Belleville plate. Conical side faces inboard towards the apply piston, and then the apply piston itself. Alright, let's see if I can force that out. So you have an O-ring here, and then you have another one here. Alright, so just check your pistons, make sure that there's no obvious defects with them, especially if you had like a hard part failure like we had in the drum. I mean, this looks fine to me. Check your drum itself. Make sure there's no issues here, any kind of cracking of the welds, things of that nature. Likewise for here. The 6R60s had issues with these leaking, and you can pressure test them. These not as bad. So check your teeth and your ring gear. Okay, check your journals. And then check the splines. I'm really going to scrutinize these once they're cleaned off. Both of these two sets of splines here. I mean, the stator looks okay, but like I said, these can twist, and then these can twist even if the shaft stays in one piece. Alright, last thing we really need to do with this disassembly is remove the front planet, and the way this is retained is a little wonky. So the assembly is held in with a combination of a retaining ring. It's basically like a snap ring, except it's inboard instead of outboard, and retaining tabs. And what you have to do is locate different access points to this retaining ring so you can collapse it inboard and ultimately relieve the ring and the tabs from interlocking so that you can just lift the thing out. So I'll do the best I can to try to show you what I'm talking about. It's going to be very hard to see on camera, but let's try to zoom in. Alright, so you notice here the lettering on the face of the planet, on this part of it. If you look immediately to the right of it, deep inside in the area of the sun gear, you can see a little retaining ring in there. Okay, and maybe you could see it, I don't know, but it's there. And you got to take like a pick or a very small flat blade screwdriver and collapse that ring inward so that you can relieve the ring from the retainers and pull the planet out. So that's what I'm going to do here, and hopefully it doesn't take me too long. Just go in like this, and you just want to compress the retaining ring. So I'll do my best to try and get this out on camera, but if it's taking forever, then I'm going to have to come off camera to do it. Alright, so we got one more location that's held. Oh, not. So anyway, that's the deal. So you see the tabs here, and then you see the retaining ring. Like I said, kind of wonky. So, as with all planets, check it. I don't know offhand what the spec is. These seem like they have a decent amount of vertical play, so if we need to, just replace it. And whatever you do, resist temptation to clean these planets out with brake cleaner or other solvent, and then shooting them with shop air to dry them off. I mean, that's a great way to ruin the planet. Okay, so anytime you have a bearing like this, it always faces toward, the lip faces toward the pocket. Okay, and then you have your inboard bearing, the sun gear. That more or less just sits in there. So check splines, check teeth, check lugs. I mean, all the usual things that you would normally check. You want to make sure that they're in good shape. Make sure these teeth don't have unusual wear or chips, fractures, anything that lead you to believe that the thing will fail when it goes back in. Alright, so now you have a large snap ring holding the piston assembly. It's going to be a snap ring like this, and then you have your Belleville style return plate. As you can see, the teeth are facing up, so this will go to the press down. We'll use our I-loop style snap ring pliers to get it out, and that's basically it. Just enough to give the snap ring room to work free, and that's it. That's all you need. And you need somebody competent behind the pliers. So in lieu of somebody competent, you have me. So here's your balance piston, your Belleville, and then your apply piston. So let's go back to the bench and we'll look at them in a little bit more detail. So again, takes an O-ring. Just check all of these engagement teeth. Make sure there's nothing obviously wrong with them. Make sure they're not about to, come off. I just look it over. See if there's anything up with it. Alright, all these Belleville plates get replaced. I don't ever reuse them. Alright, forward piston obviously does not want to cooperate. Alright. That took too much effort. Okay, these pistons changed, or they're different rather, between some variants of the 6R80 and others. And the change primarily concerns the height of the piston, and so different heights mean different amount of clutch plates that can be put into this clutch. Check the lugs here, especially the snap ring groove. You want to make sure that none of these teeth are missing, or otherwise, look like they might fail on putback. Otherwise, just look over the clutch basket itself. Again, you're checking your lugs, making sure that none of them are worn. So that's it for sub-assemblies. Like I said, just a couple of little idiosyncrasies with this transmission, the way the planet's captured versus other units. It has, generally speaking, the same architecture and design as the ZF6, whereas GM made significant engineering changes to that design overall, like detachable bell housing / pump. The center support for the 6L80 and 90, 45, and 50 all have the low reverse clutch in the center support as part of that assembly. It's not splined in the case, just like this one is. So, if you're familiar with one transmission, chances are moving to the other one won't be that big of a transition for you, or it won't be that big of a shock or a shift. But it's like anything else, you just have to get used to how they are, and they all have their proclivities and oddities, if you will, and you just have to adjust to them. So, alright, it's following day. We have all of our parts cleaned off, and we are going to begin this autopsy with a bang, so to speak. And that bang takes the form of information that I had in my possession but failed to share because I simply spaced on it. So I will apologize for that and now share with you what I should have shared initially when I was going over all the different drivability symptoms and, kind of introducing the job and, prior to tearing down the transmission. And that information is as follows. This vehicle, 2016 Ford F150 4x4 unit, suffered a drive shaft failure. Okay, and this happened, I want to say a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, or at some point just before it went into the shop. So, for the information I've been able to gather, it occurred while the vehicle was on the road, moving at what I will characterize as highway speeds. And I say that in context with these transmissions because they, the way the torque converter clutch strategy is set up, highway speeds to them is anything that involves second gear through sixth gear. And so whether the truck was moving 25 miles an hour or 65 miles an hour, it'll make a difference in terms of severity, but not so much in terms of whether or not the converter clutch was applied. And that's important because when you have a powertrain operating in a vehicle at highway speed when the converter clutch is applied, in other words, converters in so-called lockup mode, you have what's called a unified powertrain. So engine, transmission, torque converter, transfer case if applicable, drive shaft, and rear end are all as one, all operating as one unified mechanical link, if you will. So if one of those parts within that link catastrophically fails, then it almost always has primary and secondary catastrophic domino effects for the other parts of the system or subsystems. So in this case, we have an engine, a transmission, and a transfer case, along with a drive shaft with U-joints and a rear end. That is our powertrain and drivetrain. And when this drive shaft failed, and I'm not exactly sure how it failed. I don't know if it failed at U-joints. I don't know if it was a structural failure. I don't have those details just yet. But however it failed, it will have produced a massive harmonic vibration or series of vibrations instantly, both forward and aft to all the parts throughout this vehicle, okay? At least all the parts in line with it. So what that means is when it failed, a harmonic passed through the transfer case, passed through the transmission, and maybe made it to the engine. Now, here's what I think actually happened. When the drive shaft failed, vibrations were immediately sent through the transfer case and the transmission. And as that vibration was traveling through these components, it was able to pass through the transfer case because the shop said that there was no signs of damage to the T-case, okay? And it made it into the transmission. It passed through the rear gear set, up through the shaft, and once it hit the junction between the body of the shaft and the portion that splines into the 456/overdrive clutch hub, it sheared it right in half. That is my theory about what happened. And so by virtue of shearing this in half with a nice clean break like this, it essentially stopped the harmonic from traveling any further forward into the transmission and ultimately the converter and engine. Okay, shop has not mentioned anything about engine damage or any concerns about the engine. I'll ask my converter builder what he finds when he takes the converter apart, but when I emptied the fluid out, I didn't see any large chunks of metal or anything else that would lead me to believe that the converter itself catastrophically failed, despite what I initially thought. So I think that this thing kind of served as a sacrificial element here, preventing any real serious damage to the rest of the transmission as well as the engine. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll take a visual and physical inspection of all the parts and components that would have been involved and affected by this failure, and then we'll also look at the filter, which I have cut open here, because there's really two issues with this transmission. Okay, there's the broken intermediate shaft, and then there's the delaminated overdrive clutch. And there's literally chunks missing out of various frictions of this clutch pack, and every single one of them looks like this. And I don't believe that was caused by the drive shaft failure. I don't think it has anything to do with it. What's odd about it is that it is the only clutch that looks like this in this transmission, the only one. So when you have delamination like this, and I'll bring it a little bit closer so you can kind of take a gander at it, and I know I showed it earlier, but we'll look at it again. When you have pieces or segments of clutch material falling off of a disc like this, usually, at least in my experience, usually that indicates that there is moisture in the transmission. And the most common type of moisture that you'll see, at least the kind that can do this kind of damage, is ethylene glycol contamination. In other words, antifreeze. And antifreeze gets into the transmission by way of the internal transmission cooler, meaning it's internal to the radiator, and the transmission supply and return line junction with that internal cooler begins to leak. Okay, it rusts, it wears out, you know, whatever takes place, it starts to leak water from the radiator into the transmission, into the transmission system. So at first it's, you know, dribs and drabs here and there. Okay, I mean, you're not going to notice it unless you do a chemical analysis of your transmission fluid, which, you know, some folks do that. They'll periodically send out a sample of transmission fluid or oil for analysis to see if there's anything in there that shouldn't be. So absent that, you're not going to catch it usually until it's too late, when the problem progresses to the point where antifreeze is just hemorrhaging, coolant's just hemorrhaging into the transmission in volume, under high pressures and high heat conditions, mixing with the fluid and turning it into strawberry milkshake. Now when that happens, you have a complete and total catastrophic failure of the transmission. It's done. Okay, the pump is done, it's wasted, the valve body's shot. Typically all of the planetary and other gear sets, ring gear, sun gear, you know, all that stuff is typically destroyed or severely damaged. It's usually financially nonsensible to try and salvage that particular unit. You're replacing hard parts wholesale. In most cases, you just go get another core and you rebuild that. So it's always best to stay on top of your maintenance, especially when it comes to you know, radiators and transmission coolers and things like that, as things kind of get up there in mileage. Alright, this thing's venting. I'm not sure what the hell's going on. But anyway, that would be my recommendation, to proactively mitigate the risk of this kind of failure. Because when you're dealing with A-model vehicles and transmissions like this, I mean, you're paying $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, in some cases $10,000 or more, to fix that kind of situation, to get your vehicle back on the road. Alright, so here's the filter. So all I did is I cut it in half so that you can see a cross section, and then I took my cutoff disc and just cut here on either side and opened this half up like a book, and we can see the filter element exposed, and we see more delaminated overdrive clutch material, a whole bunch of other crap and crud, granulated material. So you have this, which we saw some of this on the bell housing at the very beginning of the video. It's here. So I believe that is all ground up the laminated clutch material. When we're going through the rest of the case, I didn't see anything else that could have produced it. I initially thought it might be pump, but the pump looked okay. I mean, it has normal wear patterns, but nothing like super crazy. I still think that the converter may potentially be harmed. The converter clutch itself could be excessively worn. My converter builder will let me know, and if this video doesn't go into production prior to me talking to him early next week, I'll go ahead and annotate the video with what I found here. If not, I'll go ahead and put it in the description. So at least you have some idea of what the converter was like when he opened it up. All right, so touched on the filter. I mean, there's nothing overly unusual or damning based on what else we already discovered. It is what it is. This part up in here where I'm running my finger, sorry, I didn't realize I was in the shot. All this is the product of just cutting it open, you know, abrasive material there from the disc. All right, we'll put this aside. So now I want to take you through a physical and visual inspection of everything that could have been somehow touched or impacted by this catastrophic failure. All right, we already saw the intermediate shaft, it's split in two, but what I want to make certain of is there any other damage to any other part inside the case that would have been potentially affected by this, whether it's indirect contact with the intermediate shaft or an indirect contact such as the input shaft, the forward clutch hub, the splines there, and the direct clutch drum along with the rear planet. So here are the things that I want to really scrutinize. I'll start with the rear planet. So I want to make sure that these splines are okay. So you just do a visual check, and I've been looking at this thing like, you know, until I'm basically cross-eyed with it, trying to figure out if there's any damage to it. And so far I haven't seen any, but you know, maybe you'll see something I don't, or that I may have missed. But from what I can see so far, it appears to be okay. All right, I already went through the usual type of inspection, you know, checking your pinions for vertical and side play, and you know, checking the structure in general, but I'm really interested in this area right in here, in by the splines and then the broader base plate area. So that's how you can check the visual. Like I said, they appear to be okay, but one thing you can do, if your intermediate shaft splines are in good shape, which these are, okay, I don't see any kind of twisting or warping of the splines, no unusual wear, okay. If this didn't break in half and it was together, it would probably just go right back in. So what you can do is just simply insert your shaft into the planet and wiggle it. Okay, you know, wiggle it to and fro, and that will tell you if you have an unusual amount of play. Put it on the side and see if we can show it that way. Okay, from what I feel, it doesn't feel any different to me than any other planet and you know, shaft spline relationship. Okay, the ZF6, the Ford 6Rs and the GM 6Ls, they're all the same when it comes to this general architecture. And so this feels like any other of those transmissions to me. All right, next we're going to take a look at the direct clutch, or the direct clutch drum, at the splines here. Okay, visually, I don't see any signs of warping, no twisting. Okay, I mean, under real high performance or, you know, super heavy duty or diesel, a lot of times splines like this will twist and they'll warp, and so, you know, you'll have to replace a whole bunch of hard parts if it, you know, is real bad. So that's the visual inspection. So this set of splines here mates with the forwardmost sun gear in the rear planet. Okay, slides on nice and easy, and the amount of play feels normal to me. Seems normal, appears to be normal. All right, now we're going to grab the forward clutch hub and we're going to do the same kind of visual inspection. All right, same deal. These splines appear to be normal. Normal wear. They look serviceable. And a journal could stand to use a little bit of touching up. Looks like there's some contact made here with bushings. Nothing unusual, just make a note of it since it's right there in front. Now we're going to do a physical inspection to see how it meshes with the rearwardmost sun gear, because that's where it goes. Okay, so you have, and it doesn't matter which way you do this, but this is the front, this is the rear. And so you want to take a gander, give it a good shake, a little wiggle. That feels normal to me. Okay, it splines on nice and easy. If it was difficult to get on, if it was tight, you know, you had to like kind of tap on it or whatever, and then you had to like struggle to get it off, then that would tell me that one of these two or both sets of splines were twisted or warped. And that would necessitate at least a minimum replacing this and possibly this. And if you can get these individually, then obviously that's the way to go, but sometimes you have to replace the entire planetary carrier assembly. That's more true at GM because Fords, they're not captured like the planets are, you know, with GM, where the sun gears are captured inside the planetary carrier via a sealing surface and needle bearing assembly. All right, let's look at the input shaft. Check these splines out, make sure they're okay. Again, they look in good shape to me. I don't have a converter here anymore, but once I get it back early next week before we start the build up, I will spline this into the converter to see if there's anything unusual. All right, one other thing to note, if you're going to be working on a 2015 and up 6R80, your input shaft or turbine shaft are going to take solid one-piece Teflon sealing rings, and these sealing rings require a special expander, installer, resizing tool set to properly install onto the turbine shaft or input shaft. And unfortunately, that tool set, which is made by OTC, just like all other Ford specialty tools, that set is not cheap. I mean, you're looking at spending around 500 bucks. There's 3 pieces to it, and there's a protector, an expander, and a resizer. And you know, you're spending a lot of money on that tool set. So there are alternatives. You can just employ what I sometimes do, and that is the hose clamp and rubber strip method that you know, I've used from time to time on these kind of one-piece Teflon sealing rings. On transmissions I don't do much, so I don't have like the special sizer tools, so that's what I use. The only thing with them is you want to be careful, make sure that that rubber strip that you have you know, inside the hose clamp doesn't get out of place. If it slips a little bit, you don't catch it, and you're making direct contact with your you know, the screw mechanism on the clamp, and you know, that's coming in direct contact with the sealing ring, it might cut it or damage it in some way. So I have those tools, they're in the drawer, those OTC install or sizer, protector, expander tools or whatever, and I paid about 500 bucks for them, but like I said, I do these transmissions enough to where it makes sense. Like, you know, you can justify it. I mean, it's a capital expenditure, it's not really an operating expense, so you know, that's how you have to look at it. The tool pays for itself within 1 or 2 jobs at most. So, you know, based on how you amortize or you know, depreciate it. Anyway, what else? I have all of the clutch packs on the bench, and you see a series of numbers written on them. So I want to cover the dimensions of each of these frictions, steels, backing plates, snap rings, cushion plates, so that at least you have that information handy for reference. So we'll start with the 456/overdrive clutch. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just a habit. I call it the 456 clutch, even working on a ZF, because I do 6L80s and 90s more often than these other two, and that's kind of why. But anyway, the portions of the discs that don't have chunks missing off of them are 75 thousandths thick. As you can see, there's quite a lot of wear to this clutch pack. unusual wear. So, and then for your snap ring, it's 76 thousandths thick. And then the backing plate, the portion that makes contact with the snap ring, is 115 thou thick. And then all of the steel plates are between 115 and 116 thousandths of an inch thick. And that's me measuring every single one of them. Like, I'm not pulling these figures from the book. This is literally the measurements I took. All right, for your forward, you have your forward clutch. All of these are 60 thousandths thick. All right, and as you can see, this clutch pack looks in good shape, normal wear. Okay, nothing like the overdrive clutch. For your backing plate and your snap ring's 144 thou thick. The backing plate, which is basically a flat steel, but it's QR coded, 115 thou, and then the rest of them are all 115 to 116 thousandths thick. Your cushion plate for both the forward and the direct clutch, as well as the intermediate clutch, are all 34 thousandths of an inch thick. And then the direct clutch snap ring is going to be 132 thou thick, 153 thou thick for your backing plate. And again, that's the portion that comes in contact with the snap ring. And then your flat steels are 82 thousandths thick. And we can see some slip marks on these steels. Nothing overly alarming. I mean, if you were on a tight budget, you could prep and reuse these steels if you wanted to. Just knock the glaze and the slip marks off of them. I like anywhere from 400 to 600 grit sandpaper for that. Just, you know, go around with the sandpaper in your hand, just rotate it until you knock the glaze off, and that's basically it. Some folks will use a die grinder with like an abrasive wafer pad. I've seen that too. That's also fine. Here's the clutch pack itself. Again, normal wear. Some of these measured 77 or 78 thousandths thick, but I think 3 of them measured in at 80 thousandths. So again, normal wear, what you would expect for a 150,000 mile vehicle that has been used in a daily driven application, or at least within the design limits of what the vehicle was capable of doing. All right, so we'll come over here and look at the intermediates and the low reverse. So for your intermediate / 2.6 clutch, 150 thou on the backing plate where the snap ring makes contact, and 124 thou for the snap ring. And the flat steels are 115 thousandths. And there is some slip marks on these as well. Again, normal. It's nothing unusual. 34 thou for your cushion plate, and then for low reverse, you have a 40 thou cushion plate, 70 thousandths thick flat steels, and this backing plate is 106 thousandths of an inch thick. And like I said, there's 3 different versions, and you know, there's a special procedure along with yet another special tool that you need to arrive at, measure, and adjust for your low reverse clutch pack clearance. So I have that special tool handy, and it's actually part of a set of what I'll call gauge bars, and of course made by OTC. So OTC 307554/1 and /2. The one you're going to use for the low reverse clutch pack in conjunction with a depth micrometer is going to be 554/1. So the book explains the procedure. I'm not going to get into it now because I'm going to film this entire rebuild, so you'll see it then. But if you don't have this tool or some equivalent to it, I don't know if there's like aftermarket counterparts or whatever, but if you don't have it, then you know, you can either go and acquire it, places like eBay, I think they're like 30 or 40 bucks, or you can just simply measure everything you have in there, everything that came out, compare it to the new stuff, you know, your new frictions and your new steels, and if there was no signs of issue with the low reverse clutch pack and you haven't replaced things like the case or anything else that would have an impact on that clearance, then you're probably okay. You're probably okay, but I don't want to guarantee it. The best way to go about that is just to have the tool. All right, another thing that I'll make mention of before I summarize with what I'm going to do with this transmission is these snap rings for the clutch, intermediate, forward, and direct. They're all the same. Okay, dimensionally they're identical to each other except for the thicknesses. All right, so if, let's just say I mixed these snap rings up, and who knows, maybe I did, I'll know it immediately when I go to assemble the clutch packs, because I'll have either way too much clearance in one of them and not enough clearance in another, or maybe I'm way out on the third, and at that point I'll immediately know, hey, I got the wrong snap ring in here. Okay, because the clearance wouldn't make any sense for what I have installed when it comes to all the other parts. So that's why I like to measure everything, especially if it's a unit that I don't do too often. I'll measure literally everything. Every washer, every snap ring, every clutch disc, steel plate, cushion plate, backing plate, anything that could possibly influence how the transmission goes together, and especially things like end play, front end play, rear end play. On these, the 4x4 units, you don't have to worry about rear end play, but on the two-wheel drive units, yeah, that is something that you need to measure, and there's a spec for, which I mentioned earlier in the videos. So, you know, keep all that in mind. I know it's a lot, but, you know, this video is intended to give you a holistic view of how to go about taking a 6R80 transmission, tearing it down, what to look for, how to do it, and then also all the different things you need to take into consideration. And that is in addition to what unusual kind of failures or incidents that we had to deal with and kind of figure out what happened, you know, autopsy, so to speak, so that when we go and do our rebuild, there's, you know, everything goes as it should be. There's no problems, right? Because that's what we want to do. We want to mitigate the risk that the rebuild has problems, that it comes back. Because for us transmission builders, that is like the worst thing in the world to have, is a comeback. And unfortunately, we all have to deal with it. Nobody's perfect, least of all me. And sometimes it happens. So we want to do as much as we can within our control to limit the number of comebacks. Okay, so for this transmission, we're going to get a complete total overhaul. We're going to do paper and rubber kit, which is basically all your soft parts, you know, gaskets, seals, O-rings, sealing rings, all that good stuff, you know, little miscellaneous parts. We're going to do new friction module, new steel module. I replaced the one-way mechanical diodes for these transmissions that have them. You might think that's overkill, and that's fine, but you know, to me it's a consumable. I always replace all my one-way assemblies and all transmissions I build. All right, it's also going to get obviously a new filter, new lead frame. So the lead frame will be acquired from Ford directly. The valve body will receive a Sonic zip kit. I always like to do a hydraulic correction kit on these transmissions, and you know, pretty much any transmission I build, to be honest. We're also going to do a bearing set. Normally you don't need to replace bearings if they're in good shape, but there's been just way too much granulated material and, you know, all kind of crud and contaminant floating around. It's just better to be safe than sorry. Just replace the bearings and you know, kind of start the clock new again with those as well. All right, so we're going to do complete bushing kit or bushing set. We're also going to replace all the Belleville plates. So, you know, I mean, you should know what a Belleville plate is by now, but this is an example of a Belleville plate. To me, they wear just like anything else. I mean, they're constantly working, constantly actuating or being actuated, so I prefer to replace them. Some builders don't, they'll put them right back in. The other thing that I'm going to replace is that direct clutch hub snap ring. I always replace those as well, and that just could be out of ignorance, but I mean, that's just ever reading the ATSG manual for the first time before I've, you know, built one of these things. You know, it tells you to discard it. Now, maybe I'm just misinterpreting it, who knows, but it's not that expensive, and I just replace it. It's part of the price, so, you know, just one more area that could potentially fail on you that won't. All right, new needle bearing in the rear of the case. If you were working on an earlier 6R80, I think 2010 and back, you would have had a needle bearing assembly in the pump body, where right now there's a bushing. So Omega Machine, I think I mentioned this before, but if I didn't, the Omega Machine makes a bushing that you can retro into that pump body in place of the bearing if you don't want to run the bearing. All right. Anything else? Pump gears. I'm going to do pump gears. I'm going to take the pump, both, the stator support and the body to my machinist as well, get his thoughts on whether or not it needs machining, and then, if it does, we'll have it machined. It looks okay to me, just some, normal kind of visual wear, but, no chunks, no scoring, nothing like would concern me, but I'll do clearance measurements or checks on the existing gears to see where I'm at there. And like I said, if it needs to be going through, then I'll just have it done. No big deal. All right, snap rings. You could replace the snap rings if you want. So, snap rings are available. I'll probably do that too. And I think that about does it. So I know this was a long one. I really appreciate you hanging in there. If you in fact watched the whole thing, thank you so much for your support. Even if you watched only a couple of minutes, that's still supportive, so I appreciate it. And until the next time we meet, enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and we will see you on the next video. Looking forward to it. Thank you again.